This is the first ever nonstop single-handed circumnavigation of the Arctic. At least that is the attempt. So I wanted to do this. I wanted to do another big single-handed trip. It's been years, been 15 years since I, sailed around North and South America nonstop single-handed on that little Alvin Vega. And, I just thought that this would be a good opportunity to get another circumnavigation in.
I just want to jump in and say that we're on a podcast with a dude that said, I just thought maybe I'd throw another circumnavigation
Yeah,
into.
it's nice.
My mind is made up.
Hey guys, this is Eric Kyle, publisher of Latitudes and Attitudes magazine.
And I'm David Levesque, editor of Latitudes and Attitudes, and welcome to Three Sheets, our podcast where we chill and chat with individuals making a difference in the cruising lifestyle.
Each episode, we'll dive into all things cruising related and bring you some of the most influential characters out there. So sit back, grab your favorite bottle, light them if you got them, and enjoy the adventure. Hey guys, Eric Kyle here, publisher of Latitudes and Attitudes, and welcome to the Three Sheets podcast. I am happy to be joined today by David Levesque, our editor. This is epic. Matt Rutherford is with us today. If you don't know who Matt is, you are hiding under a rock. This is the man, the myth, the legend, the one and only Matt Rutherford, currently journeying around the Arctic Circle on a nonstop voyage, first time ever solo nonstop voyage around the Arctic Circle. We're going to forgive Matt as he has to dance around his boat here a little bit, but we're super excited to have him aboard here. David, tell us what we're doing today.
You know what, Eric? We were approached by Matt's PR company about doing some stuff related to the Ocean Research Project and Matt's Voyage. And being the epic publication that we are, it just seemed like the perfect alignment of epicness. Can I make that word up? Am I allowed to? I just did. And, when the name Matt Rutherford showed up in the email, Eric went all full fangirl on the entire thing here because of his, yeah, exactly, because of his love for what it is you've been doing and all that. But I mean, reading through your bio, reading through everything else, and reading through the mission and why you're doing it, there's just so much I want to talk about in the next hour or so that we're going to talk. So let's get rolling.
Yeah, absolutely.
So welcome aboard, Matt. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what the heck it is you're doing as you continue to fiddle around with your boat.
Yeah, here I'm just trying to get this phone out of my hand so I can just be mounted somewhere. Okay, well, I'm Matt Rutherford. This is the first ever nonstop single-handed circumnavigation of the Arctic. At least that is the attempt. And I normally run an ocean research organization that does research in the Arctic. We study glaciers and map uncharted fjords and do various other things related to glaciers, biogeochemistry, understanding, the nutrients that come up, how that affects plankton growth, and so on and so on. So this year, it's a combination of things. First off, about 88% of the funding for polar research was cut by the current administration. So nobody has money right now to do any research, basically. And our scientist is trying to publish 5 peer-reviewed scientific papers. So that takes peer-reviewed. You're going to send them out. They're going to reject it. It's this whole back and forth. It's kind of this whole process. So I wanted to do this. I wanted to do another big single-handed trip. It's been years, been 15 years since I, sailed around North and South America nonstop single-handed on that little Alvin Vega. And, I just thought that this would be a good opportunity to get another circumnavigation in while the scientist is busy publishing papers and funding sucks. So, and part of this is a fundraiser. We're trying to put a new engine in the research vessel. It's a 100,000-pound steel schooner, and I built a lot of it during the pandemic, but it was like half built and abandoned for 18 years. So it came with a hull and it came with an engine, but it was an old rebuilt engine. We've been making it work. We've done multiple Arctic expeditions on it, but I got to work on it like every couple of days. It's a pain in the ass. So
I just want to jump in and say that we're on a podcast with a dude that said, I just thought maybe I'd throw another circumnavigation.
Yeah, it's nice. Feel free to keep asking me questions. I can still hear you. Yeah, well, no, man, it's nice to I mean, how many, how often in life can you just go off and do a trip for a year? I mean, we all got responsibilities. So it's not easy to just have the time to be able to do something like this. So you gotta take advantage of it while you can.
Very true, Matt. And something that I think I want to make sure that we mention right now is you are currently on this voyage. You left Greenland like last week or so, last few days, and you're 750 miles into this circumnavigation of the Arctic Circle. So the water that we're seeing out in the distance off your boat is the Arctic Ocean.
Yeah, it's foggy out here today. I got lucky, the last week or so. I left a place called Asiat, Greenland, which is way the hell up north. And I got lucky that I had a lot of northerlies. And the northerlies are not just great because they blow you the right direction, but they're also great because the colder air tends to get rid of the fog, where southerlies are warmer air that meet the colder water. And then you end up having, more fog essentially. So today the wind died. I've been bobbing like a cork for like 5, 6 hours. It was blowing 30, 24, well, maybe 30 hours ago or something. It's blowing in the 30s. So there's still a little bit of a sea state left. And currently I'm trying to get this I just jived over in super light wind right before you guys picked up. So I'm just trying to dial in the last bits and bobbles so she doesn't round up into the wind. But
Didn't
yeah,
you say it was about 40 degrees out there right now?
yeah, it's in like the higher 40s. It's pretty nice, for this area. I'd say normally it's between 35 and 40 in the Arctic in the summertime. So, it's not that bad.
Not that bad. It's about 100
So I just
degrees.
want to mention that we're recording this on July 1st, 2026, just so we have a timeline in place for people in terms of when Matt left, right?
Yeah, I left the 25th of June because it's about 3,400 miles to get from Asiat, Greenland to what they call the Northern Sea Route or the Northeast Passage, which is above Russia. So, the timing of everything is very important on this trip because if not, you got to be at the ice above Russia when it first starts opening up. You got to get through Russia, ideally, well, by the end of August, early September at the latest, and then you got to get through the Northwest Passage by October 1st, or else you're kind of screwed. You get stuck in the ice, you become Shackleton essentially, and I don't
How
want to
many
become
miles
Shackleton.
is this in total, Matt?
I don't know exactly. I mean, nobody's done it before. Probably 9 to 10,000 would be my guess.
Okay.
Did you hear that?
So
Nobody's done it before.
Yeah, I mean,
just
there's only so much to go off of, really.
just a little history. I became enamored with Matt's journeys as a sailor when the movie Red Dot came out, which was what, 12, 13 years ago, something like that, Matt.
Right, Red Dot in the Ocean. Yeah, Red Dot in the Ocean came out, I think, in 2014. Sorry.
And
And
that
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that movie inspired me because you were the first person to solo navigate nonstop the Americas. I think I saw that you came out of Annapolis, took a left, and continued to take a left until you came back into Annapolis.
Yeah, exactly. So you leave out of the Chesapeake Bay, you sail north between Canada and Greenland, you turn left and go through the Northwest Passage around Alaska, and then down the Pacific around Cape Horn and back up to the Chesapeake Bay. That is a circumnavigation of the Americas. So I have done a nonstop single-handed passage through the Northwest Passage. Only two people have done that. I'm one of them. The Arctic is brutal. I mean, the hardest part of that trip wasn't Cape Horn. I mean, I put the boat upside down in the Bering Sea very temporarily. She came right back up again. But, even that and the storms by Cape Horn, I would still say that the Arctic was harder. And that's just because of sleep deprivation and icebergs. It's a constant, it's a constant threat. So, and that's hard. I mean, normally open ocean single-handed sailing, I mean, there might be some traffic around or something like that, but generally speaking, you can, you can get some rest and even if it's in whatever. I mean, I don't like the 20-minute intervals, like the egg timer thing. I think that's kind of an old traditional thing. I don't really like doing that. But you can especially when you're away from shipping and with AIS and proximity alarms on AIS, there's no reason why you can't get some good sleep and kick your feet up, read a book or whatever. But when you've got icebergs and all different shapes and sizes, and some of them are big and giant and they get picked up on the radar pretty easily. Some of them are, the size of a double-decker bus and most of it's submerged. And those ones, the radar generally doesn't see. So, but anyways, that's the way that, that's the reason why it's so hard up in the Arctic is sleep deprivation. It's like you're on watch constantly. Like you never get a break. So
Didn't you have a fuel bladder break while you were up in the Northwest Passage as well?
yeah, I had some fuel bladder issues. Um, with you got to put a box. So here, I'll show you inside of here. Let me get out from into my little enclosure. Okay, there we go. Now we're sailing.
Yay.
All right.
That is foggy.
Yeah, it's foggy. You see these boxes?
Yep.
There should be a table right there, right? So instead, there's giant fuel bladders in these boxes. So yeah, I learned the hard way that if you want to have a fuel bladder, you really need to put it in a box. If you don't put it in a box, there's a good chance it's going to break. You can get away with doing 100%. In other words, like if your tanks are big enough where you can take 100% of it out of your tank at a particular time, then it's not going to slosh around so much. But the general problem is when it's sloshing around, and then you have issues with it breaks the seams. It's just a lot of weight. If you got 100, diesel's almost 7 pounds a gallon. So as it's sloshing around 700 pounds roughly, you take out 20, 30 gallons. It's just there's no baffles in a fuel bladder. So yeah, I had some problems with leakage on that, and that was a big pain in the ass. So essentially, if you put the bladders in boxes, you can get away with a lot more. Just having that additional protection makes a huge difference in the not breaking the seams, essentially.
Matt, let's talk about the vessel. What are you on right now?
It's a Valiant 42. This is the only catch-rigged Valiant 42 ever built. It was built in '98. I'm a big fan of Valiant 42s. The 40s were also great boats. They had the blister years in the late 70s, which was kind of a bad thing for the reputation. They actually kind of went out of business for a while, and then they were rebought. They moved down to Texas, and they essentially turned the 40s into 42s. They just added 1,500 pounds of ballast, a 2-foot bowsprit. It's really a 40-foot boat, ultimately. And they moved the mast a little bit forward. Supposedly it has a little less weather helm, but it's a Bob Perry design. So, it's kind of the era. There was a time when, double enders were the quite the hot thing. You had the West Sail 32s, you had the various Creelock design Pacific Sea crafts. This is sort of the last iteration of the Valiants, the Texas built. So, you have the 42, you had like a 39, you had a 50, and so on. But, they're proper blue water boat, cutter rig, 25,000 pound displacement, made for blue water. I would say they're not made for hitting ice. But then again, the Titanic was made of steel, and it didn't help the Titanic very much, right? If you hit anything, it doesn't really matter. You hit anything hard enough, you're gonna sink. So
The obvious question first, Matt, is how are you avoiding the icebergs? And at what point in this journey, now that you're almost a week in, are you going to be in iceberg fields?
well, I've been in them. I'm getting out of them for a little while, although I mean, there still could be theoretically an iceberg right in front of me, but I do have a radar on right here. Um, it's a Garmin. It kind of sucks. It's the latest, greatest Phantom 18X Plus. I don't know if Garmin sponsors you, but they might not after hearing me. But
They won't now.
yeah. I like the chart plotter. Don't get me wrong. I like everything else. It's just this radar. It just doesn't have the ability to get rid of sea clutter very well. And there is a setting for sea clutter, but essentially it picks up the tops of waves, right? You got a sea state, it starts seeing waves, and it starts painting it on the radar screen. And you're supposed to be able to control that up and down. And I have a Ray Marine on the research vessel, and they have their issues too, but their radar seems a lot better at reducing sea clutter. So I don't know. It's just it has a hard time picking up the smaller bergs, and the smaller bergs can be the size of a double. They can be the size of a two-car garage sticking up above the water, which is like, hitting a rock in the middle of the ocean that will sink you and kill you. This water is so cold you last about 10 minutes before you go into shock because this is ice water. So I had to go up to Asiat, Greenland to start. That's way up in Greenland, because I need to prioritize the finish line, not the start line. And when you're doing a nonstop circumnavigation, obviously the start line is the finish line. It's the same basic idea, but I need the finish line to be as far north as humanly possible. So when I come out of the Northwest Passage, it's now late in the season. You're talking early October. You're talking it gets nighttime. Like right now, we have 24-hour light in the Arctic, right? In the summertime, the sun doesn't set. Well, by October, you're getting 10, 12 hours of darkness. It's getting down to like 20 degrees at night. You got ice all over the place. It's dark. You don't want to be going, you want to limit that distance. In between the Northwest Passage and Greenland is a large body of water called Baffin Bay, which is an absolutely beautiful and absolutely treacherous body of water, because Greenland is the only place in all of the Arctic that has an ice cap. Like if you think about it, like Alaska doesn't have an ice cap. Siberia doesn't have an ice cap. Canada doesn't have an ice cap, but Greenland is kind of like Antarctica down in the south, where Greenland is mostly a giant chunk of ice. And that means that there's glaciers that come down from that ice cap and they calve and create icebergs. So Baffin Bay, which is like 1,000 miles north to south and 600 miles east to west. So I think the word bay is not really the right word for it. It's just the explorers didn't know any better when they named it. It should probably be called Baffin Sea. And it is just full of freaking giant icebergs, little icebergs. And last year in October, there was 3 storms over 70 knots in October, right, of last year. So I'm trying to get as close to the mouth of the Northwest Passage, the eastern mouth of the Northwest Passage as possible. So when I pop out of it, I have the shortest distance to go to get to the finish line. After I get to the finish line, I'm still up in the Arctic, but I can get more fuel, I can get food, and then I can work my way down the coast and jump across the Labrador Sea back to like Newfoundland area with weather windows. But if there's a storm, I can duck in and drop an anchor, where that's not a possibility when you're doing a nonstop. A nonstop trip means you can never drop an anchor, which is a little bit of a, I don't know. It's an interesting thing to me, because when it comes to nonstop, single-handed, unassisted, let's say circumnavigation of the world, which is the typical thing, right? The Knox Johnson sort of whatever, that sort of thing. So single-handed has got very clear rules, right? You got to be alone on the boat, or else you're not single-handed. Unassisted is very clear, because somebody can't come and give you a bunch of diesel and a freaking 6-pack of beer and a pizza, right? So it's very clear. But for some reason, the nonstop gets kind of muddied. Like there are people who drop anchor and still say they're doing a nonstop trip, like the GGR, for instance. Like, the Golden Globe, that has been quite a big deal for a while now. In that race, yep, you can drop an anchor, and then I think a couple of times, and they still consider it nonstop. And it's like, if we were taking a U.S. captain's license test right now, and there was a question on the test that said, if a boat drops an anchor, is it a vessel underway? And you say yes, you would get that, you would get that wrong. Like, have you ever sailed past an anchorage and had somebody look at you and point at the anchorage and be like, look at all those boats underway over there? You'd be like, what are you talking about? They're on anchor. Mm-hmm. So I don't understand this whole aspect of it, but in my brain, for whatever it's worth, nonstop means nonstop. You cannot drop an anchor. You can't run and hide. If a storm comes, you got to stay out there and you got to take it. Like, hopefully with weather routing, I use predict wind, and it works pretty well. In the Arctic, it's a little more sketchy, but it's still pretty good. And hopefully I can reposition my boat if I see it coming ahead of time. Like low pressure systems are fairly easy to see because they're kind of big systems. The light winds are often the harder thing to predict, but maybe I can. I mean, you can't always reposition, but maybe I can. But regardless, you can use a parachute sea anchor, because that's just, you're just drifting around slower, but you're still drifting around, or a drogue, for instance, but you can't run aground. If you run hard aground, you're not a vessel underway. You have stopped. You can't get towed, obviously. You can't connect to a mooring ball or anything connected to the ground. An iceberg that's run aground, you can't tie off to that.
So
So you just
nobody
have
can
to,
come out and give you any supplies, no fuel. You are just on your own all the way
right?
around the Arctic
Yeah,
Circle with nothing. No
but
help, no
but
support.
who's going to help me in the Arctic? Like is the Inuit going to come out and their little boat with an outboard and give me something? Like I'm going to do my absolute best to do this nonstop. There is always a chance that I might have to stop and get fuel. I don't know, right? I can't sit here and tell you there's 100%. All I can tell you is I'm going to do my best. I brought 400 gallons of fuel. I've got 3,000 pounds of extra fuel on this boat. So I've got literally as much as I could possibly fit on here without completely overlading this boat because you don't want your boat to be too heavy. I already sunk the water line probably a couple of inches. Now, I did the same thing on the Alban Vega going around the Americas. The Alban Vega was a 5,070-pound boat. I probably put 2,000 pounds of stuff in it, included part of that was 100 gallons of diesel that I had in a bladder down the middle of the boat, specifically for the Northwest Passage. In the Arctic, you can get these high pressure systems that just kind of sit in the Arctic and end up dominating for a while, which means you can get 3, 4, 5 days of no wind at all. And into those, yeah.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask you, how long did it take you to prep for this? Because I mean, you've obviously done incredible research on what it's going to take to survive this and get this done properly.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is my 8th time sailing in the Arctic, right? So that helps. I've got a lot of experience up here. The boat itself, we got in October of last year. I don't own this boat. I don't have the money to own this boat. IM 42s are not cheap boats. We did get a good price on this one, but it was a 98 and everything was original, like everything. And so I pulled the generator and I replaced it with a Dakota lithium battery bank, 1,300 amp hours lithium is where the generator used to be. And they're now making lithium batteries. It's not just Dakota. Dakota's one of them, obviously, but that are 300 amp hours and a Group 31 size. So that's an amazing amount of power for a Group 31. That's like unheard of 5 years ago or even 3 years ago. So I have 4 of these Dakotas that are like 320 each. They do a dual purpose. If my start battery dies, supposedly you can use them to start your engine if you had to. But anyways, that's where the generator used to be. We pulled the Westerbeek 42 that it comes with, put a Yanmar 57 in there. It doesn't have a turbo, which is helpful. There's like another equation to this whole fuel situation, which is, let's say you and I were in a race, all right? And we have the same exact car with the same exact amount of fuel. But the race is not a speed race. The race is really an endurance race. Who can make it the furthest? And now we have a straight road that goes on for thousands of miles, right? So we don't have to worry about that. Straight road in the desert, let's say. What speed are you going to travel to beat me? All right, maybe 35, 45, 55. If you go 80, you're going to burn your fuel too fast, and I'm going to end up passing you. Like you're going to be the tortoise, and you're going to be the hare. I'm going to be the tortoise. So it's the same thing with a marine diesel. Like, what is the optimal RPM you can run a marine diesel to get the maximum distance or the maximum hours with that engine, which is probably 1,400 RPM. Well, if that's the case, you don't want a turbo, right? So this 57 Yanmar is naturally aspirated. Now, diesels don't like to be run at low RPMs. So every 8 hours, I got to bump it up to 2,300 RPM for 20 minutes just to kind of heat it up. And, you don't want spent fuel accumulating on the inside of the cylinder walls. But anyways, and I put something called an auto prop on. An auto prop is a feathering prop that self-pitches, and it creates a more aggressive pitch at lower RPM. So you go faster at lower RPM. Now, it doesn't make any difference at 2,000 RPM. It's just going to go whatever speed you're going to go. But at 1,400, you get this automatic pitching that gives me a little more bite and a little more speed. So I had to come up with this whole calculation of what is the best motor, prop, fuel to give me the maximum mileage for the Northwest Passage of Canada and the Northern Sea Route above Russia. I also pulled the rig, both of them. It's a catch. I stripped them down to bare metal and rebuilt everything. So everything on the masts are new. The sails are new. There's a place in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, where they actually make sails by hand. nobody makes sails by hand anymore. Sail makers in America are. I used to work for North Sail, and North Sail used to have a loft in Kent Island across from Annapolis, Maryland. I used to work there. They closed down the loft. Almost all the North Sails is being made in Sri Lanka, right? Hyde is the Philippines. It's all made over in Asia. So you meet a sail maker in America, they're not sail makers. They don't make sails. They might repair sails, maybe, or they're like salesmen trying to get you to buy a sail. They'll be like, oh, this cloth, it's a cross-cut cloth with, whatever, fancy Dyneema, sewn into it, or try radial cut or whatever it is. But anyways, this place in Lunenburg, it's like this little old lady. She actually makes sails like the old traditional way. So I had her make me bulletproof offshore sails. It's 10.5 ounce everything, every sail on this boat. The mizzen, I got 3 reefs in the freaking, the mizzen. I got 3 reefs in the main. I got heavy sails across the board. I hope I don't have to use a 3rd reef in a mizzen. I mean, Jesus Christ. But it could happen, like if you got to claw your way off a lee shore in 45 knots, you're not going to be using your main. You're going to be using your triple reef mizzen and your staysail. I mean, that would be the way to do it on this boat. Hopefully that doesn't happen.
So we
but
know,
you know what,
Matt, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
David, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, I don't want to cut you off, Erik, because what you got to say, I want to hear it. But I'm like so enamored by all this. I feel like we could literally do several podcasts on this thing. And maybe this is something that we do, or we have several conversations with you over the course of the entire journey that you're on. I would love to do that. Everything you've told me so far, I want to go back to what you said about the icebergs and the timing of getting through the iceberg field. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that the whole reason you're doing this is because of the issues with the polar cap
Right.
melting, right? Do I have that correct? In a sense that
yeah.
a circumnavigation of the Arctic Circle is even possible, which is
Right.
the whole mission of the Ocean Research Project. That comes back to everything ties together with why the hell you're doing this in the first place.
Yeah, I see. We've been doing research up in the Arctic since 2015. So last year we went to a place about 78 north, way up northwest Greenland, place near a town called Qaanaaq, one of the most furthest north towns in Greenland. And in 2016, we mapped this whole area. It's about half the size of the Chesapeake Bay. We did a ton of CTDs, which is where you lower a probe that does salinity, temperature, and tells you the depth. But it's, to oversimplify, it's like a temperature probe, right? And we did it like 140 times in this fjord. So we went back last year. We have not been there in 9 years to this one glacier. And in 9 years, this glacier has retreated 4.5 miles, and the temperature went from 1.5 centigrade to 3 centigrade. So it doubled above zero. So, I mean, I know that this whole issue got wrapped up into politics, and I'm not really trying to get into any of that kind of stuff, but obviously there's less ice. And this year is a record low for ice in the Arctic in general. Last year was also a record low. This year is a little lower than last year, but I think when it comes to these issues, people sometimes get caught up on a single data point, like one hurricane or one heat wave or one cold snap or whatever it is, and be like, oh, this is proof it's climate change, or proof that it's not, or one way or the other. You really want to look at long-term trends. You want to have thousands of data points, not a single data point. And if you look at the last 30 years of ice in the Arctic, I mean, you can get satellite imagery of it pretty easily on the internet. NASA has a site you can tap into. And yeah, you can see that we've lost like 1/3 of the ice in the Arctic. Now, what it really comes down to, and this is whether you believe it's man-made or not, I guess, it just comes down to the amount of CO2 in our atmosphere, right? The amount of carbon in our atmosphere. So we had 270 parts per million before the Industrial Revolution. We have 420 of them today. We had 400 parts per million not that long ago. It's rapidly increasing. And carbon is like putting an extra blanket on you in bed. Like if you're laying down and I just keep putting more and more blankets on you, you're going to overheat and you're going to sweat. Nobody wants to be sweaty in bed, right? So the more carbon you add, it's just adding a thicker and thicker blanket essentially on the earth. Now, is that enough to cause this problem? There's the debate, right? Some people say, oh, it's a wobble, it's this, it's that. It's not my job really to tell people what they should or shouldn't think about it, honestly. Like, I'm in the business of collecting data. There's other nonprofits out there that like all they do is outreach, which is some education or talking about this, that, and the other. We're on the beginning side of it. We're the ones who actually go into the field and collect the data and write the scientific papers. So the other organizations can take that information, present it to the public, however they're going to. People are going to believe it. People are not going to believe it. I mean, that's out of my hands, right? And
Let me ask
but
you a
yeah,
pretty uneducated question, Matt, and I know that this is
sure.
probably going to sound a little silly. I'm not a political guy. I'm not a partisan guy. I'm neither a climatologist or an industrialist. But I've heard arguments about climate change since I was a kid, going to school in the 70s and 80s.
Hmm.
And the consensus always seems to be it's man-made. We need to do more about it. EPA's formed. We've done a lot, I think. It seems to be in our genes now as industrialists to make sure that the climate change issue is addressed as best we could by putting caps on smokestacks and so forth. And it's like a politically correct thing to do that all companies do because they want to show that they're in favor of making sure that we're not contributing to the issue. Other people have said that, okay, it's a wobble.
Right.
It's the natural cycle of the planet, all that kind of stuff. What does it matter, Matt, if the ice caps and I've heard Antarctica has increased by a certain percentage with the ice caps down there while the Arctic has decreased? I mean, what is it? What does it matter? What is the point of all this discussion about climate change? Which brings me to the point
Right.
of why are you doing what you're doing?
Well, I think why it matters. You guys are located in California, is that correct?
Ohio, Buffalo, Toledo, and Buffalo.
Okay, well, you guys will actually, both of you would be pretty good. I'm born and raised in Northeast Ohio, but in good old Warren, Ohio, the bustling old, it's like the ultimate Rust Belt town. But anyways, so I'm in Annapolis, Maryland. Historically speaking, the way that they did trading and the way that we developed the world was through boats, through big sailboats, tall ships, all that. So in a lot of the major cities around the world are either on the ocean or they're like up a river. Like London is up Thames, right? Paris is up a river. So if you melt Greenland, you have 21 feet of sea level rise globally. If you melt Antarctica, you have 268 feet of sea level rise. So, the problems become when almost every major city around the world, or a majority of them, start going underwater simultaneously. And obviously, it doesn't happen in like a big wave. This takes time, but that would be a problem. That would be a problem of I don't know how many trillions of dollars of magnitude to move all those cities. Um, and Antarctica is breaking. There's giant ice like Larsen A, Larsen B. These are ice shelves. They're all breaking up. And what happens is that the land-based ice, it's not the water-based ice. Like if you melt the polar ice cap is water, is ice in water. So if you have a glass of water with ice in it and the ice melts, it doesn't overflow, right? Because it's already compensated for the ice. But it's about land-based ice. So the only land-based ice, the only ice cap is Greenland in the Arctic. Greenland is mostly an ice cap with a little bit of land around it where Greenlandic people, Inuit, where they live. And Antarctica is just a giant ice cap on a continent, right? It's just massive amount of ice. So when you have ice on land that can melt and run down into the ocean, then you have the problems with things like sea level rise. And I think sea level rise would be a big one because, like I said, so many of our towns and cities are on the ocean. But again, it doesn't happen instantly. And I don't know what the time scale is. All I know is it's all melting. Greenland is melting faster than it's growing. Some of the glaciers are moving faster. So, like Antarctica does have glaciers moving faster, but that's just because it's melting faster. So, of course, the glaciers are going to move faster too. I think that I've had to do a lot of talks over the years at a lot of yacht clubs, and you could definitely lose half the audience pretty quickly, depending on how you talk about this issue, because it has gotten wrapped up. Al Gore did Inconvenient Truth a long time ago, and ever since then, it really got wrapped up into politics, whether you believe it or don't believe it or whatever. And that sucks. We also do microplastics research, and it doesn't matter where you are politically, plastic trash in the ocean, everybody looks at that and says that's bad. That has not been wrapped up in politics. So it just, whatever. But I do think that melting, the Earth's glaciers and the Antarctica, Greenland, the polar ice cap, which reflects, the polar ice cap reflects a lot of the sunlight, and the ocean will absorb it. It just becomes a snowball that turns into an avalanche. I don't think it's going to be something necessarily in our life, like your lifetime or my lifetime, that's going to flood New York and flood all the cities and all this kind of stuff. Um, but it's something that we should be paying attention to at the very least. I don't
Mhm.
see why not do research and at least keep an eye on it, like what's happening here. And I think everybody can agree that clean energy would be a good thing. I mean, stuff happens with oil. Like right now, we have the closed Strait of Hormuz, right? Because of the Iran conflict. That's causing a lot of problems with oil. There's been other issues with oil through the past. If we can create clean energy, it's not just good for the environment, but it's good for us. Humans need energy, right? We're going to get it somewhere, whether we get it from coal or nuclear or solar panels or wind generators. We need it and we're going to get it. And we have to be realistic about the infrastructure we have today. We still going to burn some coal because we still have to, right? We're still going to have nuclear can work really well. Just depends on how you do it. We don't want a Chernobyl, obviously, but they're much better safety systems than there used to be, and obviously way better than Chernobyl. But I think we should all kind of work towards trying to create better, cleaner, cheaper energy too. Solar panels are technically the cheapest form of energy on Earth. There's nothing close to it. But are solar panels enough to power New York City? No, of course not. We're not there yet. And battery technology is not there yet. We don't have batteries. Imagine you could capture a lightning bolt and stick it in a giant battery bank. I mean, but imagine how hot that is. You would melt all your wires. You got to, I mean, obviously we have to do a lot of technological improvements. Um, but yeah, I mean, part of sailing, doing the sailing trip is a fundraiser for the nonprofit. It's to get more attention. That's why I'm using the nonprofit for the YouTube videos, the social media. Everything is funneled. The way, like if you want to track me and see my position, you got to go to the oceanresearchproject.org. You go to the website. So I'm trying to funnel everything through it to bring as much attention to the organization. Nobody's going to donate money if they don't know you exist, right? So the first step is people have to hear about you exist in the first place. But yes, by doing this is also demonstrating how much of a dramatic loss of ice we've had in the Arctic. And like I say, you can look at it. It's pretty easy to see that a lot of that's been over the last 25 years, 30 years or so.
This journey wouldn't have been possible 30 years ago because
No,
you would
no.
have run aground like Shackleton and got stuck in the ice. But now, because the ice caps have retreated so much, there's open water for you to be able to sail through. You might have to dodge a few icebergs, but the point of what you're doing is to show that this is a real situation that people should be aware of. So, what does the
And to have some fun.
yeah, yeah,
Have
yeah,
a good
yeah,
adventure. I mean,
yeah,
who's kidding
yeah,
who,
yeah.
right? I don't want to greenwash this thing either. Like, I enjoy, long distance single handed sailing. I enjoy a good challenge. So, I mean, if you don't enjoy this shit, you shouldn't be doing it in the first
I'm
place, right?
I'm gonna also go on a limb and say you enjoy being alone. That's what I'm gonna say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird because when I'm running my research vessel, it's a 100,000 pound, 72-foot steel schooner, and I've got usually 6 to 8 people, right? Half of them are sailors, half of them are scientists, and this goes on for 5 months, and there's almost no privacy, right? It's kind of like the quarantine in a pandemic. If you're stuck in a small apartment with like 6 to 8 people for 5 months, you're just always there, you're always around each other. And then that's like the astronomical difference of single-handed sailing. Um, I don't have any problem with solitude. It's not loneliness. There's a big difference between loneliness and solitude. And the problem I think is that when you're on land, you feel you're surrounded by people, right? And so you're like, why don't I have more friends? Why am I alone all the time? It's an emotional, like loneliness is emotional, where solitude is not emotional. Like there's nobody out here to talk to, right? There's nobody here. Like who am I going to hang out with? If there's a polar bear, there's nobody around here. So, in this type of a situation, it's just mental. It's not emotional. So I don't have problem with solitude. I don't like loneliness. I don't want to be on land feeling all lonely, but I
Well,
have no
I would
problem with
point out
solitude.
that Superman did have a fortress of solitude for a
Yeah.
reason. I tell my wife and three daughters that all the time.
I'm
So
Yeah,
gonna
I,
say
I
exactly.
want to ask two real quick things, Matt, and I don't mean to get too personal on this, but
Sure.
as you were growing up, you had a tough time. What contributed you becoming involved in the sailing interest based on how you grew up? What
Yeah,
happened to you
well,
as a teenager?
It wasn't my family because they weren't sailors. I'm the only person in my family to have a sailboat on both sides of the family. Yeah, I grew up in a cult. My parents were in it for like 20. My dad was in it for 25 years. My mom was in it for 20 years. I was in it from 0 to 10. Dorothea was a cult leader. It's kind of like it was Christianity with like Eastern influence. Like she couldn't get bit by mosquitoes because she had like a force field, a God force field. Of course, it was total bullshit. But and she became more controlling over time and blah 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 blah. And then we got out of that, and I think I was kind of angry and depressed, and I don't know. We didn't. There was not much of a process after it where we talked about what we've been through, and everything just switched, and we didn't really talk about it. Anyways, I started finding adventure, right? Because I wanted adventure back then. I just didn't know it through the street life. So, by the time I was 16, I've been locked up 5 times, been to rehab twice. I was always in and out of institutions, in and out of cop cars, you know, committing crimes and all that stupid. Just being a street punk. I mean, they weren't violent crimes. I wasn't going around beating anybody up, but, stealing cars and, doing dumb shit. And then eventually we get into, selling drugs. There's a lot better money in selling drugs ultimately. And did that until, on and off until till I was 25 years old. And on my 25th birthday, I walked away from the street life completely and really went 100% into sailing. And there was a little bit of an overlap for a couple of years where I was sort of transitioning from from selling drugs to sailing. But the street life is a hell of an adventure. I mean, it is a crazy ass adventure. And I got way up up the ladder, so to speak, to at the end, I was running my own operation, making way more money than I've ever made since. I'll never make that kind of money again, which is fine. It's not a big deal because that life is also a really messed up life. Most of my friends from back then, they were like brothers to me. They all came from broken homes. Parents were crackheads, all that. We all banded together when we were young teenagers because we found support amongst each other that we didn't have in our families. And we grew up together, got locked up together. We sold drugs together. We never ripped each other off. We never ratted each other out. We were real close. They're almost all dead, and they've been dead for years. So, I mean, most people don't make it out of that lifestyle. And that's something they don't tell you. They tell you a lot of things when you're a kid about don't do crime or whatever. But one thing they don't tell you is some of the people you've been closest to in your whole life, you're going to watch them die, like all of them, from overdoses and murder and suicide and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, I needed adventure in my life, right? Sailing is a positive adventure as opposed to the street life. And so I kind of went all in. And I do that, right? I'm the kind of person that when I set my mind to something, I go all in. So I'm going to go all in on the street life. I'm going all in on the street life. I'm going all in on sailing, go all in on the non-stop single-handed circumnavigation of the Arctic. I'm going all in. It's just the way I'm wired. So yeah, and I started, one of the first things I did is got a job for North Sail, making sails. And then I worked as a rigger and I worked at West Marine for a while because the discount used to be better. The associate discount, it got worse over time, but back in like 2007 and 8, it was still pretty good. 2008, I did my first single-handed transatlantic on a 323 Pearson, which I sailed over Europe, Africa, Caribbean, and then sailed, did the Atlantic Circle single-handed, which was nice. It was a 2-year trip. Total budget, like I was on anchor all the time. I couldn't afford marinas. I was living off of €6 a day for a while in Spain. But, in Galicia, you can get a bottle of wine for like €1.50. You can get a fresh baguette for 50 cents euro. You can get a little bit of brie, a little pate. I was living pretty good. I had all the wine and baguettes and cheese and whatnot. I could, and when you travel alone, you tend to meet the local people adopt you a lot more. I once rode a bicycle alone through Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand. Spent 100 days on a piece of junk Schwinn bicycle back when I was 21. I sort of took a break from the streets to go on a biking trip, which was crazy because when I got back from that trip, all my friends, I couldn't talk to them about it. Like they've heard of Vietnam because of the Vietnam War, but they do. Like literally, it'd be like me trying to speak to them in like ancient Greek or something, like it just didn't mean anything. And I just did this insane, freaking trip. I felt like Indiana Jones on that damn thing. And I come back and I literally can't talk to anybody about it because they just can't understand it. But anyways, when you're alone on that bicycle or you're alone in Galicia or whatever it is, it's a double-edged sword because sometimes you want to talk to somebody you can't. I don't speak those other languages. It's hard to conversate, but you get adopted a lot by the local people when you're alone. So you get all these incredible experiences where you get to really immerse yourself in other culture in a way you never would if you were traveling with other people, you know? So I don't know if I've even come close to answering a question at this point, but
No, I'm just fascinated listening to it, and I'm wondering, quite honestly, how much baguettes, cheese, and wine you have on board right now. That's what I'm
fuck
thinking.
off. I only got one bottle of wine, unfortunately, but I do got some whiskey and some tequila, so that's what matters. And
No,
I
I
got
think
a
more than anything, Matt, I just I wanted to put who you are in context because that's what most fascinated me about your journeys. I also came from a challenging situation and ended up doing something what I think is productive and good with my life. And I quite admire your fortitude and fearlessness to adventure as you have been. And that's inspiring to me. And I'm certainly hoping others. A lot of people think that when you come from the streets, like, dare I say, you and I have, there is not a lot of good results that come from that. And I think what you're doing now is great. So, to that end, I would like to ask you a little bit more as we're kind of rounding this up. Tell us about what this charity is and what your hope is to accomplish with this journey, this charity, and what you're trying to do.
Sure. So when I did the nonstop single-handed circumnavigation of America, 309 days alone at sea, they made that movie you mentioned, Red Dot in the Ocean. You can watch it for free on YouTube if you want. And I think it was on PBS for 8 years. I think they still got it on their website. But anyways, when I got back from that in 2011, I left and got back 2012. And immediately I started getting a 501c3 for this nonprofit. It's called Ocean Research Project. I'm not very good at naming things, but at least you know what it is when I say it, right? We do ocean research, mostly focusing on microplastics. We've been to the Atlantic garbage patch, Pacific garbage patch. We've done stuff in the Chesapeake Bay, and then we've done 6 Arctic research expeditions. So one thing I want to do is show that a sailboat is not just a pleasure craft. In other words, sailboats used to do everything, right? When you had tall ships before the steam engine, the combustion engine, sailboats did everything. And then after steam engine, combustion engine, they've been relegated essentially to pleasure craft, which is fine. I do love a sailboat. But I think that sailboats have a place as cost-effective data collection platforms. So in other words, with this 100,000-pound, 72-foot steel schooner that we have, I can operate that at less than 10% of the traditional cost. The traditional research vessel in the Arctic is between $50,000 and $100,000 a day. And that adds up, even if you're on the lower side, the 50,000 a day, that adds up real quick. So we can operate between 3 and 5 grand a day, depending on what's going on, and maybe even cheaper, if depending on what's happening. We definitely have done it for cheaper. It's nice to be able to pay my crew some salary, and that's where the bigger expenses come in. So also, like a traditional research vessel burns 2,000 gallons of diesel a day. So we'll burn 2,000 gallons of diesel on a 5-month, 10,000-mile expedition from Annapolis all the way up Greenland, 3 months in Greenland. So we go to the Northwest Passage too, sometimes do research in there, all the way back down to Annapolis. So the technologies needed to do research have gotten a lot smaller and less power hungry. There used to be sensors the size of me that are now the size of a coffee thermos. And there's autonomous technologies, underwater and aerial autonomous technologies, which we've also worked with. So basically, sailboats are becoming much, much more capable of doing like the higher end professional scientific research, stuff they never could have done 20 years ago because the technology just wasn't there yet. And his technology is only getting better. The scientific equipment's only getting less power hungry. It's getting smaller and more compact. Sailboat is only getting more and more capable. So yeah, I mean, cash rules everything around me. Wu-Tang taught me that a long time ago. And if you can make something cheaper, that is going to perk up some ears. People want cheap, right? And you can make research just that much more affordable, and you can add that much more environmentally friendly to throw that in the mix. Then we're coming with a winning solution over here. But proving it takes time. It takes not just one expedition. That's why we've done 6 of it, and we're still proving. Even after 6 expeditions, multiple scientific papers, we've written papers with NASA. I mean, we've done all sorts of stuff. I've gotten 2 awards from NASA, from the chief of NASA, and we're still proving it though. I I think there's a decent amount of research on sailboats as citizen science. I think like 90% of it is, and that's fine. I'm not saying anything's bad about citizen science, but that's not what this is. This is professional research. We have our own scientist in the organization, who works for the organization, and she is the one who directs all of it. So I captain the vessel getting up to Greenland. When we get to Greenland, it's like I'm not the captain anymore. I mean, I'm the captain, but she takes over and she's now the captain of what's, we're going to this fjord, we're going to this place, we're going to this place. And at that point, I'm just, sir, yes, sir. And I just make sure we can get to that place and not hit a piece of ice, make sure my crew doesn't misbehave. I got to manage personalities, right? Part of a captain is being a personality manager because this crew is mad at this crew and you got to make them get along and all that kind of stuff. I handle all that. But when we get into the fjord, it's action time. It's really she takes over, and it's really this combination of the two of us that make it work. Because I don't know, I'm not a scientist. I don't know how to use all the fancy equipment, and but I can sail us there. I can get us there, and I can raise some money. I built half the damn research vessel in the pandemic.
You're collecting all this data, and you're doing all this scientific research. To what end? What are you trying to prove? What are you taking to NASA? What are you taking to these government agencies to say, this is our result?
I don't think you want to go into science trying to prove something, because you're gonna have a skewed view of the data, right? If you go in automatically trying to prove climate change is happening or not happening or whatever, then that's the angle you're going to look at the data. You need the data to speak for itself. You don't speak for the data. The data speaks for itself. So you have a scientific question, right? Basically, the way science works is, what is a scientific question? It could have something to do with like the underneath of a glacier is basically a melted river of glacial water. But in that water is all sorts of nutrients and minerals from like churning up the earth as it grinds down the mountain. And those nutrients mix with nutrients in the ocean through something called upwelling. And it's like this perfect recipe for plankton, for creating phytoplankton. Half of Earth's oxygen comes from phytoplankton. It's an important thing. So when the glaciers retreat, they just become big muddy rivers and turn the fjord into a giant mud puddle. You can't have photosynthesis. If it's a bunch of mud, you can't have the nutrients. The recipe gets all screwed up. So for instance, this could be, and this has been one scientific question that we've done in the past, is looking at the connection between ocean terminating glacier, like a normal healthy glacier, and a land retreated glacier that is like a dying glacier dumping all that mud into water, and how is that affecting phytoplankton? All right. Now we're not going to go into it saying it's going to affect it one way or the other. All we can do is collect the data and see it. Ultimately, you publish papers. You want to get it in Nature if you can. That's like the creme de la creme of scientific publications. But there's a bunch of other scientific publications. All the data we collect is publicly available. And now there's about a 2-year delay on it because we want to publish first. If I just stick it out there, some other scientists could publish with our data. And we need publications for scientific credibility. But after a couple of years, it all ends up out there, and and the whole scientific world, so to speak, can use any of this data for whatever they want, however they want. But yeah, we map uncharted fjords because the not for navigation, but because you can see like how the glacier has retreated since the last ice age, since the last glacial maximum, by the marks that it leaves in the bottom of the fjord. And it's kind of like the rings on a tree, where you can see like this year there's more water or less water with different rings. You can see how it's moved, not obviously in high resolution, but you can get this idea of it. We've done a lot of that, so we've done quite a few various studies, most of it based around glaciers in one form or another. We're in fjords with glaciers most of the time, or without, if we're trying to do a juxtaposition, like this type of fjord, deglaciated versus glaciated versus land retreating or whatever. But ultimately, what I'd like to do personally is create a fleet of research-ready sailboats. And it doesn't just have to be the Arctic. Anywhere that's remote, anywhere that's difficult to get to, we can get to for a fraction of the cost with a fraction of the environmental impact, whether it's the Great Barrier Reef or whatever it is. You want to make a boat specific, like Great Barrier Reef have diving, right? So you're going to want dive compressors. You're going to want to have something called a wet lab because you're going to be dealing with like marine species. You want to, scientific equipment for marine species. So, but I mean, why just have one boat? I can scale this thing pretty much to infinity. Obviously, I need more funding to do it, but the sky is the limit as far as how much research we could do, how many research sailboats we could have.
Well,
So
speaking of
personally,
funding,
mhm,
the Ocean Research Project is your main source of funding.
Roaster Research Project is my organization. I created that. I am
Yeah.
the executive director of Ocean Research Project, and
Okay.
I am the founder of the organization. So
So
I
how do
created.
we get there in order to support you, Matt, and what you're trying to do? Not just financially, but if we have an interest in having our boat be part of your fleet, since a lot of these recreational vessels can use some of the technology available now to help you to collect data. Is there a portion of what you're doing that outside of sending you a credit card number that we can get involved as cruisers around the world? We publish this magazine, Latitudes
Right.
and Attitudes. It has an awful lot of cruising sailors in there. Can they get involved with what you're doing as well?
Well, we need to have citizen science projects because that's citizen science, right? So, for instance, we had a citizen science project in the past where we gave people this listening device called a company called Vemco. They kind of have a monopoly. Any tag species that has an audible tag, it pings a certain ping. This thing could pick it up if it swam within like a few hundred meters of your boat, and it would automatically record what it is. And that's an interesting study to see the migration and movement of different species of whatever sharks, sea turtles, and so on to happen to swing by your boat. Each one of those devices was $1,000. We never could get any funding for it, and we had people lose them, and all sorts of things happen. And that's kind of the problem. Is we tried to do a big citizen science project. It cost us a ton of money that was hard for us to fund, and half the time people didn't even, they would lose the equipment or they would write down in the logbook, and it's. I think that it is important to try to create citizen science projects for your average sailor. And there is an organization that's all it does called it used to be called Adventures for Science and Conservation. I think it's called Adventures for Science or something. And I know some of the stuff they do, they used to at least have some basic, like count birds, for instance, like in the ocean. Like simple stuff like that can be helpful to a scientist that specifically wants to know, bird populations in the ocean, for instance. The problem with what we're doing is this highly technical stuff in the Arctic surrounded by ice and all the rest. It's awfully hard for like a Catalina 30 to be able to really get involved in that. But
That'd be
it
an
doesn't,
adventure.
yeah, yeah. It doesn't mean that under the right circumstances, we can't have some kind of coordination. Don't get me wrong. And I want to create more citizen science projects down the road like we had in the past. But it has to be quite simple. Because the truth is that a lot of people, they're out there on their own sailing trip, right? That's really the point that they're out there. They're not really out there to collect data, and you have to keep it really simple. So ultimately, we did create an app with that citizen science project, so people didn't have to write it in a logbook anymore. Because your phone has your lat and long and a timestamp. Because we need to know where was this fish, and or whatever shark or whatever it was, and what time was it, like where and when, right? So we did get that far, but we had to develop an app that cost a bunch of money. We wrote like 5 different grant proposals to try to fund it through a lot of different foundations. Nobody funded it. So eventually we had to stop it because we couldn't get any money for it. And half the time people were losing the equipment anyways.
Well,
So
putting
it's,
that portion of it aside, Matt, I think it's important as well to mention that people who want to support what you're doing can go to oceanresearchproject.com, I assume.
yeah, oceanresearchproject.org. And
.org.
we're a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you're in the United States, it's all tax deductible, right? We're the same as Greenpeace or anybody else. So you could donate whatever. You could donate a car. People donate sailboats. You could donate a helicopter if you got one. It's so we can take whatever donations along with obviously private funding. And we try to get grants. We write grants all the time to foundations and stuff too, trying to. You got to bring funding from a lot of different sources to make this work. And even $5 makes a difference. Like all of it, every penny makes a difference. And I haven't paid myself a salary in 15, and well, yeah, 14 years that I've been doing this. And neither has Nicole. So, we make money. I deliver boats back and forth to the Caribbean. I've done it 38 times now. I do public speaking. Nicole works for the Horn Point Lab, University of Maryland, on the part time. So we do what we can to bring in money. So the money isn't being it all goes to doing research. And but we need to, we need to try to keep expanding the organization, and it has been. Like our first research boat was 42 feet, and now ours is 72 feet. Our second one, we have grown. It's been a real pain over the years. It's been, starting a nonprofit is the easy part, and growing it. But like I said, it's been 14 years. If we were going to quit, we would have quit a long time ago. And hard work and perseverance eventually pays off. It just sucks in the early years when you're grinding and grinding, feeling like you're just spinning your tires, not getting anywhere. But yeah, oceanresearchproject.org has, obviously a link that you can donate, or if you wanted to donate a boat, or just there's an email if you just want to reach out to us, you could do that too.
That's outstanding. So listen, we absolutely believe in what you're doing and want to support you in any and every way that we can through Latitudes and Attitudes. And David and I will be happy to, put this podcast out there and help raise awareness. So I want to thank you for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating. Just one last question for me, and David, I'm sure you've got another one too. Do you have an estimated arrival time back in Greenland to complete the circumnavigation? And can we follow you like we did on Red Dot?
Right.
Know
Yeah,
where
yeah.
you're at?
Yeah, the technology has gotten quite a bit better since back then. So if you go to our website, because I'm trying to direct attention to the nonprofit, so everything is run through the nonprofit. So if you go to oceanresearchproject.org, there's on the landing page, you'll see where I'm at. And with Predict Wind, it does like a weather overlay. So you see where I'm at, you see, what the weather's doing, where I'm at, all that kind of stuff. I'm making videos once a week on our YouTube, Ocean Research Project's YouTube. And I'm putting out like a short reel once a day on Ocean Research Project's Instagram. So I'm just trying to funnel everything through. So yes, subscribe to the YouTube or the Instagram, and check out the website, and you can see wherever I am and whatever the weather's doing. And also there's a lot of all the history of all the expeditions and everything we've done is right there on the website too, obviously. So it's a one thing to talk about all this stuff. It's another thing to have been, doing it for years. And, we've got a long history of successful expeditions.
I've been following your Instagram posts daily, and I was messaging with Aaron the other day, your PR specialist there. You're nonchalantly just going through the Arctic Circle, dodging icebergs. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there worried about when I'm going to mow my lawn for the holiday weekend here in the States. So I'm completely impressed with what you're doing. I look forward to possibly having a baguette, some cheese, and a bottle of wine with you at some point in time or another, maybe even some whiskey. I got to ask the question because I saw this in the PR that came out. You gave yourself, I think, a 75% chance of making it.
Right.
How are you feeling right now?
Well, so put that in context. When I left to sail around the Americas nonstop, single-handed on an Alban Vega, I gave myself a 50-50 chance. So you like flip a coin, I don't know, heads you live, tails you die sort of thing. But so I'm doing a lot better, right? This is a volume 42 we're talking about. This is I'm like sailing the Taj Mahal compared to an Alban Vega. But I think 75% is realistic, and make it could mean a lot of different things. As far as it doesn't necessarily mean I die, but obviously that could happen. If I hit a piece of ice, I mean, I might not get into life raft fast enough. And even if I do, the water is so cold, if I get in wet, I'll die of hypothermia in the life raft, or the life raft will get destroyed up against an iceberg or whatever it is. So yeah, I feel fine. I mean, look, you got to accept the reality of what you're putting yourself into. So first off, how is panicking going to help anything, right? Panicking doesn't help anything, but it comes from fear. So you have to learn to control fear, or fear will control you, because fear becomes panic. Panic becomes injury or loss of life, loss of vessel, but it all starts with fear. And it's not about being fearless. I am not a fearless person. It's just learning how to control it. And a good part of that is acceptance. You have to accept that you might die before you leave. You have to accept the reality and the difficulty of the situation you're putting yourself in. So when you're in those storms, you're surrounded by that ice, you could be nonchalant because you've already accepted it. Like you've already, I knew this was going to happen, and now it's happening, So there's nothing to be like, oh my God, there's a gale, there's icebergs, I mean, I know that sounds good for like, the algorithm or whatever for social media to have a bunch of drama and stuff. But I mean, it's pointless. It's useless. Was Shackleton panicking when his ice got crushed or his boat got crushed in the ice? No, Shackleton was cool and calm, and that's why he was such a great leader. So you gotta stay calm, accept the reality of what you're putting yourself into. And once you have, there's at that point there's nothing to do but, have fun and try to get some sleep because
I
sleep
think we need
deprivation is a big
to.
problem.
I think we need to do a part two to this podcast. I mean, you're going to be at this for the next several months or so, if not a little bit longer.
Yeah, I didn't answer the other question. I'm sorry too. October, let's call it October 5th. I would like to be done back in Greenland. If the Northwest Passage starts to freeze again around October 1st, and if I don't get out of the Northwest Passage by October 1st, I risk getting Shackleton, getting locked in the ice, and that's a bad thing. Obviously, we have an El Nino this year, and maybe even a super El Nino, and that could create warmer weather later in the season in the Arctic. So that's possible. It'll buy me an extra week or two before the ice comes back. Maybe. We don't know yet exactly how much this El Nino is going to develop. But yeah, ultimately I need to wrap it up in early October and then sail back down to get back to Annapolis, Maryland by early November. When I'm north of Russia, it would be hard for us to do this because Starlink has been banned. I'm talking to you on Starlink. So I'm kind of going to go blackout above Russia, but we can either talk at some point in July, or we can do it when I get out of Russia at some point in September when I'm heading towards or going through the Northwest Passage.
I think that would probably be ideal because I did read also in the PR about how you had to obtain a permit
Oh
from
yeah.
Russia, right? That's very interesting. So we don't need you being accused of a spy. We don't need that to happen.
No,
Yeah,
no, no. The whole Russia thing, it took 6 months to get the permit. It's that's the biggest, craziest part to me, is sailing north of Russia. Not just the geopolitical aspects of it, which are obvious, but there's some really heavy sea ice, pack ice, and the pack ice is what crushes boats, not the icebergs. Icebergs and sea ice are completely different animals, and there aren't icebergs up there north of Russia. But there's a ton of pack ice, and pack ice will surround you and crush you. And there could be 100 miles of pack ice. And yeah, and I won't, I'll be using the Iridium system. I have basic forecasts and I'll be able to get basic ice information. But I will go radio silent and then the Northwest Passage is not something you sleep on either, right? I mean, that's more explorers have died trying to go through the Northwest Passage than all the rest of the Arctic and Antarctica combined. So, I mean, the Northwest Passage is no joke either, but at least, it's Canada. They've got good ice information. I'll have Starlink again. I'll be able to get on the Canada website and see their ice information. And I've done it before, right? I've sailed through it. So at least I have some knowledge of it. Where Russia, I don't know what's going to happen, man. I don't know if they're going to what if Russia forces me to land? What if they're like, you got to go to land. We need to search you, or you get run up on by a Russian naval ship with a big black dinghy with a bunch of dudes with guns runs up on you. What are you going to do? There ain't nothing you can do.
You offer them the whiskey. Start there.
I got vodka for them. I do have a bottle of it just for them. They ain't getting the whiskey. I give them the vodka. But
Rocky 4, I think it was, where Ivan Drago show them that movie, and at the end of the fight, we just can't we all get along kind of thing.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Listen, Matt, I want to thank you again for joining us today. It's been an incredible conversation. And I think that if you're going to be done around early October, I'd love to do another podcast from the Annapolis show mid-October with you having that victory lap under your belt. So keep it in mind, my friend. I want to, again, extend all of our best wishes to you. And if there's ever anything that we can do here at Latitudes and Attitudes or Three Sheets Podcast in order to help further your cause, keep us in mind.
Yeah, just tell people what I'm doing, and then, so more people can follow along and see what happens, because I don't know what's going to happen. It's not a good adventure if you know the ending. I don't know what's going to happen,
Good
That's
point.
a good point. Well, we wish you all the best, my friend, and enjoy your voyage. Be safe.
All right, I'll do my best, man. That's all I can do, 1 mile at a time.
I'm into that. Thanks, Matt.
Yep. All right. Thanks, guys.